I don't know Greek. I know Roman. I know Latin. Hey, thank you for joining Escape With Me Book Club. Escape with me, Sam Reiner.
And me, Caitlin.
Into our most recent read. Come with us as we evade reality and go into detail about a new book. We'll be covering the book from beginning to end, so there will be spoilers. Today we are going to Oxford, England. Published in June 2021, The Maidens is the second book written by Alex Michaelides. Many buyers bought it off the love of his previous book, The Silent Patient. This has big shoes to fill. So how did Alex do? Was he able to keep the quality of his first book, or did he hit a sophomore slump? So background is the intro's me. I bought the book because I liked the first book. Is me. And then I made you get the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, so is me. I'm that person. Age level, adult, for sure.
Yeah, just the content. The reading isn't hard, but the content, definitely adult.
Yeah, the content warning definitely has spoilers also. So I know we give a little warning at the top of the hour, but even the content warning has a lot of spoilers. So, but we're going to get through them. Oh, my paragraph here. All right, let's do this. Death of a spouse, murder, mental health, drug abuse, child abuse, self-harm, blood, graphic violence, death of an animal, sex, sexual assault, grooming, incest, and rape.
Yeah.
So that's our little paragraph. If you have a problem with any of those things, please do not read this book. It's not for you. It's all good. It's fine. Judge a book by its cover. Okay, so looking at the cover, which is a bust of a woman's head, and then it has blood and the Maidens written over it. I don't know if you're one of those people that reads the synopsis or looks at the cover first. I look at the cover first.
A little bit.
So from looking on the cover, I actually thought it would be about someone going into the cult and then realizing, holy crap, this is a murder fest.
Knowing him, there's obviously going to be a murder and it's going to somehow tie into Greek tragedy. And that's not wrong. That is what happened.
We could quibble on Greek tragedy there. It came into it, sort of.
Yep.
Question mark. Anyway, was there anything from the cover that you thought would happen that maybe did or did not happen?
No, I mean, like you said, it's just that bust. If I knew more about Greek art or Greek mythology, maybe the bust would have meant something. Who is the bust? Do you know what Greek figurine it is?
If I honestly had to guess, I would assume it would be a bust of Persephone, but I could be wrong.
No, I would guess the same thing.
Because the eyes are covered and that actually covers most of the face, it's really hard to tell. But I'm sure if someone was more cultured and it's like, I've seen that before, and it's obviously XYZ, then it would be obvious. But
yeah, I don't know.
It could be the statue of David for all I know.
Oh yeah, sorry. I tried to pull it up on my computer, but I'm just now being able to pull it up. Yeah, and how it kind of looks like a torn piece of paper, and then you can actually, I just noticed you can see the bloodline across the bottom of the bust where their throat would be cut.
Yeah, that's why I thought it was going to be a murder fest.
Yeah, I mean, also this author, that's what he does, so.
Yeah, that's true. It was marketed as a suspense and a follow-up, so he didn't jump genres, but he could have.
Yeah.
Did not.
No.
Which may or may not have been great. To go into my very obvious bias, I don't like the book.
It wasn't as good as his first one.
No, and that's evident by if ratings mean anything to anyone. Everywhere that there are ratings for this book, it is marked almost an entire point lower than his first book, which is sad. But also, I read the back and I did some research and some interviews and stuff where he was talking about writing this book, and he essentially wrote the book because he was bored during COVID and he wanted to relive his going to Oxford and being there. And yeah, that's what it felt like. It felt like we took a trip to Oxford. I know way too much about way too many rooms in great detail.
Yeah, and I gather that some of the stuff that he was talking about wasn't even real. It was made up stuff.
Yeah, but it was, I don't know, sometimes it got into descriptions, like paragraphs long descriptions, and I was just like, we're not paid by the word anymore.
Yeah.
Can we not? Because, oh my gosh, why it bothers me so much is he cuts way more into describing the places than I feel like he did in describing the people, which should matter way more in a mystery. Because, and I noticed this early on in the book, and I kept track, people in this book have one of two eye colors. They either have dark eyes or they have blue eyes. There are no other eye colors in the entire book.
Interesting. I did not notice that, no. And I mean, part of it is, I don't think in his first book did he really get to play around a lot with descriptions of locations, right? Because, spoiler warning for that book, for The Silent Patient, it was basically just his apartment and then the ward that the patient was being kept on. And in that one, he had to do so much description of the people because they were the main focus. But to some extent, location and the literature tragedy that was being brought in was more important in this book than the last one.
And that's why I'm kind of sad, because I think that was his strength, honestly. Creating these really interesting characters and scenarios in which the characters interacted, because it was a relatively small cast, all things considered, in the main areas. But this one had so many more people and so many more locations.
Yeah, and I think he definitely struggled with actually making them all important. I was really confused what Fred's purpose was going to be there for the longest time.
I hated Fred.
Yeah, he's obviously in there as a misdirection. He's kind of a total tool bag. And it's just like, why? Why are you here? Why do you keep showing up?
I hate him with a burning passion. I also hate the main character, but let's talk about suspects, and we can talk about Fred first because he's here. He's introduced as a creep.
Yes.
On the train.
Yes.
Staring at her the entire time. She is uncomfortable. They get off the train and he's trying to ask her out, and then he just keeps popping up and hassling her to go out with him, and then she's like, yeah, that sounds good, and he starts being the love interest. Excuse me?
It was real weird.
No!
Yeah. What I found interesting is I think that the juxtaposition of him and Henry, right? Because Henry, her client, who was tracking her the whole time, right? He had no boundaries, but Fred didn't have any boundaries either, right?
And neither does the main character.
Well, yeah, that's a problem too. But they both were hyper fixating on her, and because of her relationship with Henry and everything, he was painted as the more dangerous, unstable person. But I'm sorry, if I was on a train and one of the first things that someone said to me is, I've had a premonition that I'm going to ask you to marry me and you'll say yes. I'm not talking to this person anymore. And I'm definitely not going to actually go out with them. And then what also made me mad is the end of the book leaves it open.
Yeah, like that could totally happen.
Yeah, literally the line was, and who's to say what the rest of their relationship was? Like, you're the author. Don't do that.
Oh my gosh. There are some things in this book where I feel like him picking a female protagonist was a bad idea.
Yeah, problematic.
If we were going to juxtapose Mariana and Theo was a go-getter. He was invested. Like, he did it, but but he was invested in this mystery and he was going to figure it out. And he frankly took things too far and had boundary issues of his own. But you kind of let him because it was furthering along the mystery. And you're like, please break this boundary because I want to know if the brother-in-law did it.
Yeah.
And that's not the problem Mariana has. Mariana is timid and lets a bunch of people tell her what to do, and she doesn't actually investigate. And while the entire time Theo's background at being a forensic psychotherapist is relevant to the book, and he's doing therapy sessions all the time, and he's analyzing people and stuff, Mariana gets a group session in the very beginning of the book, and then like 2/3 of the way through, there's a half-hearted attempt to do it with the Maidens. And that was kind of interesting, but it didn't turn out. And I'm just like, you didn't need to be a therapist to be the main character of this book.
Okay, so I haven't done any research into the author. What is his history with therapy? Because personally, as a therapist, it is super weird that this man fixates on therapist investigative qualities.
Okay, so let me pull up specifically so he's an author and a screenwriter, which is cool, and you can kind of tell some of the action scenes are more his bag.
Yeah.
But he got an English literature degree from Cambridge, and he studied psychotherapy for like 3 years.
Okay.
And then apparently he actually did work for 2 years in it in a secure unit for young adults.
Okay, so he does have he's done therapy work.
And apparently working there is what his inspiration for the Silent silent patient was. And you can feel in that book it's way more grounded. And I say it's weird because the inspiration for this book was I miss college and I'm isolated by COVID. That's not nearly as grounded.
No, that's part of what I wanted to talk about, what group therapy is, right? Because you're right. They did one session with this woman, and let's cut her some slack. She is still ridiculously not over her grief issues. She's still very hyper fixated on that, right? She's in extended grief mode and literally doing whatever she can to survive. And as a therapist, that can be really hard.
It can, but I don't think she's a good group therapist. We are seeing this 2 sessions and both of them end badly.
Well, and that's the thing. A group therapy session doesn't always end positively. That's kind of when I wanted to talk about what group therapy is. So group therapy and people who are group therapists versus regular therapists, it's literally a whole nother world. I've run groups before, and trying to regulate 6 to 10 people all at once, trying to observe body language and words and all this kind of stuff, and simultaneously guide them in a way where they're going to get to a deeper understanding of themselves, but not be a member of the group is so difficult of a line to walk. And people who run group therapy, it really is, and I mean therapy in general, is really just all about pointing out how you're interacting with other people. And I can see why he chose a group therapist as the protagonist, because he had this idea of the Maidens were supposed to be this group that was turning against each other. I saw what he was trying to do, but I don't think he gave it enough attention or time to really build it up.
No. And that's what I was disappointed about. Because, like I said, the group therapy sessions with the Maidens, and I say both of them ended badly, not because the sessions themselves may have ended badly, but the first one ends with her stalker being like, hey, I'm your stalker, and her being like, that's cool.
Yeah, that was definitely problematic. I think you and Danielle talked about this in his Silent Patient episode. Why the heck are also all these Britons running things in their houses?
Oh my gosh, yes.
That's just not smart. That's not a good idea. I can't handle it, especially when you do inevitably get clients like this who have these really difficult issues and they have these boundary concerns. You don't want them to know where you live, and you don't want them to be able to follow you.
I just kept getting so frustrated with her because he was clearly not ready for group therapy.
Yes.
In the beginning, you're like, okay, yeah, he's just gruff. He's not part of the group. And there's phases that a group goes through. And when you add a new member, it kind of messes things up again. It's like, okay. But when he gets to the point where he's like, I'm straight up stalking you and I want private sessions with you. And if you don't pay attention to me, I'm going to stalk your house and call you and threaten to kill myself. I'm like, he needs to go back.
Yeah.
To personal therapy, possibly be committed again, because those are levels that are unsafe for the therapist, and it's not fair to keep him as a client. He's not doing well.
Exactly. And most people who do group therapy, people have individual interviews before they go in. Usually there's a requirement. You're going to meet with the individual therapist like at least 2 or 3 times, talk about what group therapy is, how you're going to do that. And then what she did too, once you start group therapy, it is not often that you do individual sessions with somebody, because then it looks like favoritism, right? Like you're getting more services. And she tries to put up this boundary, but it's really half-hearted with Henry. And she's obviously so distracted by all her other stuff that I don't necessarily want to say that she's failing him as a client, but you're right. The reason he got to this place is because people didn't set boundaries with him and people didn't maintain those boundaries. And she's doing the same thing. I think I remember reading a section where she really struggled with whether or not to hospitalize him because that had happened to him before and it was very traumatic for him, which the hospital is traumatic for a lot of people. But at the same time, we have rules and ethics and a level of care for a certain reason. So someone who really does call you up, even though you're in a different city, you don't even call the cops or adult protective services and be like, hey, this person is doing this. Here's his last known address. Please go commit him.
Or whoever the emergency contact is, be like, hey, go check on this person.
Yeah.
If you ever get to the point where it's like, I am legitimately considering suicide, the hospital is where you go.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm really frustrated with the Henry thing, especially because it all builds up to straight up Henry actually does follow her to Oxford, finds her, has a knife in his hands, going to attack himself or her. I'm still confused on that. I think mainly he was going to kill himself in front of her was the final decision that he made. And the police come, and then Henry is never mentioned ever again. Literally 2 chapters later, the police are like, you're acting paranoid. I'm like, she was almost murdered.
Yeah, his character did not have the follow through that it needed.
I hate to call it at this point, but it doesn't affect the story in any way. It's just fluff. It's just pages. And in a book like this, that's sad.
Yeah, exactly.
If you need fluff, that's sad.
Well, and he used it to create tension with the main character. That's literally all Henry is there for, is just to create the tension in the story. And then as the diversionary people, you know, 'cause we went off from who are the suspects, right? Like Fred is obviously there and you're like, I'm kind of suspicious, but I'm not super suspicious. Henry, you're like, if it's going to be anyone else, he has the capability for murder, right? So that's all they're there for, is just to throw you off the scent of what's actually happening.
Yeah, but I never suspected Henry. He was obsessed with Mariana, yeah, but he wasn't in Oxford. He couldn't be stabbing these random girls. He's over stalking Mariana. He's busy.
Yeah, obviously he didn't have the time or anything to be able to do it, so I don't know.
I don't know why he was there, other than to show off, once again, Mariana sucks at people. And what really frustrates me, it's a personal pet peeve of mine, I hate an incompetent detective.
Yeah.
Because you spend so much time with them.
Fair.
And the author goes out of his way to point out that Mariana sucks at people and reading people and understanding people.
See, what do you mean?
Okay, so the first time she meets with the detective, Mariana reads him over and he's like, oh, he's not actually paying attention. And there's a line in the book that says, but she was wrong. And then it shows that he was paying attention during this whole time. And then he does this over and over again, like with Henry, she does not take him seriously enough. And then this craziness happens. And with Fred being like, hey, I should be concerned about you. And then it's supposed to reveal at the end, oh, she actually didn't know her niece or her dead husband. She didn't really know them.
Fair.
And it's just, so every time she was suspicious of a person, I wasn't.
Fair.
So it was so frustrating when she would hunt down and follow Mr. Morris, because I don't think they ever gave him a first name, even though he's like a 20-year-old. But she was following around Mr. Morris, and Danielle pointed this out to me. This is the second book in a row, granted he's only written 2, but in both of his books, the main character watches other people have sex.
Yeah.
That's really weird.
Yeah, and that doesn't happen in real life. I feel like it's very misrepresented. Like, has this happened to you, Alex, author? Like, what is happening?
It's weird.
It is. It's super creepy.
At least in the first book, you're like, oh, it's the cheating wife and blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of more glossed over, like, oh, they went into the woods together and blah, blah, blah. But this one, no, she's like straight up watching these two people, not even turning away, watching these two people have sex in this graveyard.
Yep.
And then she gets upset that Mr. Morris calls her out on it.
Yeah, absolutely weird.
So bizarre.
Yeah.
She should have been thrown off campus for that.
Mm-hmm.
And they never explained why that happened.
No, yeah, they did. They were in a relationship, and then Mr. Morris was blackmailing Fosca, and that's why Fosca hadn't said anything about it, because I do think Fosca was also sleeping with his students too. And so it was basically like the I'll keep quiet if you keep quiet kind of thing. So yeah, and they both were arrested at the end of the day. So, which is good. Like, at least the creeps got arrested.
Yeah.
Those creeps. There are many other creeps that didn't get arrested, but
yeah, it's every man in this book is a creep.
Basically, yeah.
Except for the actual detective who is just trying his darndest, honestly. But can we also talk about how Mariana meets with the dean and the dean is like, okay, cool, leave, don't do anything. And then Mariana immediately goes out and announces to literally everyone, the dean has asked me to investigate this. She was surprised that came back on her.
Yeah.
Really obvious lie. And it didn't win her any favors with anyone.
No.
No one trusted her.
No, not at all.
That was bad.
Yeah.
Oh, Mariana.
Mm-hmm.
And there were things like in the very beginning, Zoe is scared of Fosca and Mariana's like, oh, that's suspicious. And I'm like, she's convinced he's the one who killed her best friend. Why would she not be scared of him?
Well, yeah, and I mean, that's the thing. You read more mystery than I do, but just in reading this guy's books, right, everything is done as a way to point you in the direction of all the roads look like they're leading somewhere. Like, I think that's the whole point of a whodunit. And I mean, this happens in real life too, right? Like, everything looks like it's this, but then actually you find the one missing piece that shows you it's this other thing. And so from Mariana's perspective, all she's doing is focusing on the things that point to it being Fosca, right? But in reality, if she had had the understanding of Zoe being in the Maidens from the very beginning, Zoe's behavior, I think, would have looked different. But she she didn't know that at the beginning. So everything that Zoe was doing looked like she's fearful of Fosca because he's the one who's doing this.
Okay, so good mystery to me. We'll have fake out suspects and stuff and red herrings and things. And it should feel, especially considering his massive inspiration is Agatha Christie specifically. And what she is so good at doing is giving you enough breadcrumbs where you're like, okay, I can piece things together. And you don't feel mad, but once you have the revelation, you're like, holy crap. It makes sense, but holy crap.
Yeah, and I think he did that in his first book.
He did that in his first book because that was the whole plot twist at the end, that the story isn't told in sequential order, was like brain breaking, like, holy crap, that was awesome.
Yeah.
Because he relies on that reader tendency that whatever happens is happening as it happens.
Yes.
And that was really good. And that's why I actually really appreciate about that. And it felt like an Agatha Christie plot turnaround where you're like, oh my gosh, it's so obvious, but it's not obvious. How was I ever supposed to figure it out? But you're not mad about it. And it's actually very satisfying.
Yeah.
That didn't happen in this book.
No. And I don't know whether or not it's because this can't be it, because obviously this didn't happen to other mystery writers, but maybe it's because we knew what to look for. Partially, that's what I was thinking about. Like, again, I don't read a lot of mystery at all, but I knew this writer's style. I knew the moment it was written down in paper, the line, the murderer is Edward Fosca, and I had no doubt in my mind about that. I'm like, well, this fool's not the murderer then. That's very obvious, you know?
Oh my gosh. You're reminding me of the prologue now. I hated the prologue. I hated the first 13 chapters of the book. The book could have started on chapter 13 and I would have been so much happier.
Wait, remind me what the prologue was.
The prologue is oh my gosh, it's Edward Fosca.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
He's the murderer. And then you start the book and she's pining about her husband and you spend 13 chapters and there's one on the group therapy session and then most of them are just her recalling stuff about her husband, which the dead spouse trope is not my favorite because I always feel like it becomes belabored. As a person, that probably makes sense, but as a reader, you're reading it and you're like, you've got issues.
Well, and I think the interesting is comparing it, right? It makes me wonder about this author's life because in both of these books, the husband is the one cheating on the wife and the wife is the innocent and everything and realizes they didn't know their husband this whole time, right? So part of me is like,
Yeah.
But the other, it's so weird. Like you said, the therapists, they prize themselves on being able to read people and know people. But I also think it highlights that, if anything, this book just speaks to how strong your perception can be. And when you're convinced you're right, you're convinced you're right. And almost nothing will convince you.
Which is so frustrating because, like I said, incompetent detectives, huge pet peeve of mine. So when I know going in, well, I didn't necessarily know going in. I thought maybe, okay, that's the thing. But as it kept going and she kept being more and more convinced it was Fosca and she would throw out information that she would gather that wouldn't quite click into place, it just became frustrating because she was so biased.
Yep.
And so every time she's trying to investigate him or learn more information about him or trying to call him out, it just felt like a waste of time.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting. This just came to my mind reflecting on the fact that he did write this during the pandemic, right? That's what humans do. We get convinced that our way is the right way, and it doesn't matter what we see, what we read, we will twist the information to make it make sense to what we believe and what we know. And I think that especially happened and was pointed out, that character, that human trait that we all have to be like that was heightened, especially during the pandemic. And so, if anything, this is an interesting representation of how, no matter who you are, you have the ability to be blindly biased.
Which would have been nice if it weren't so obvious. That would have been better if we didn't realize it. There's a reason why books and movies are based on true stories. That's the other thing. It's a little hypocritical. She complains about the police not focusing on Fosca. And it's like, you're not going to do it because it doesn't fit your mold or da-da-da. And then at the end, it's not Fosca. And you're just like, cool.
Yeah.
Great. That was fun. We couldn't have dropped some more clues to the ending. Nope. We had to go on a dinner date with Fosca. That was the other thing thing.
Oh, that was so creepy.
Why every single guy is she having these romantic instincts with? I don't know what it is. It's kind of creepy.
Well, I mean, again, and like we pointed to, the male writer writing a female protagonist, that the only way they can have any kind of meaningful conversation is under the guise of romance or the guise of, because you think this about me, obviously there's some underlying attraction. Because the problem is she leaned into it. There were moments where she was like, why is this guy so weirdly attractive? Why does he make me feel these things, kind of thing? And I mean, part of it is because straight up narcissist.
True. It wouldn't have been so bad if that wasn't every single male character.
Yeah.
If it had just been Fosca, it could be this creepy, dark thing. And he could have really played up this weird semi-attraction she has for him. And maybe she learned some stuff about herself. I don't feel like she did that really.
No.
But it was Fosca, and it was Fred, and it was
Julian.
It was Julian, and it was Sebastian, frankly.
Yep.
How have you survived this long and been this bad at people?
I don't know.
This is your job.
Mm-hmm. She was definitely too close to the situation, obviously, with Zoe. So that's what I got more and more, is that you can't have that objectivity.
Oh, yeah.
And that's something as counselors we have to do, right? Is we have to pull ourselves out, because the benefit that I always tell people in speaking to a therapist or a counselor is that you have a third party person who doesn't know anything about your life or your family or your relationship or whatever, and they can listen to you talk and show you, nah, you're being stupid, or nah, they're being stupid, or whatever, because they can have that objectivity when we can't have that about ourselves. And this whole book is this woman who's entrenched in her own objectivity of Zoe, and then also Cambridge, and then also Sebastian, and all this kind of stuff. And so she can't pull back to actually see what's going on.
Oh my gosh.
But that's then the whole point of the book. He's purposely writing her like that to fulfill the story.
He is, but unfortunately, I don't think he does it well.
Exactly.
Which it always brings me back to whenever you had an English class and there was like this pretentious guy, and he's like, well, I did that on purpose. And you're like, well, it still sucks. That's kind of where I am on that. I'm sure he's a great guy in person. No hate on him whatsoever. But sometimes the way he wrote Mariana, I could not help but side-eye him and be like, is this what you think women are?
Yeah, which is a problem in a lot of when men have tried to write female protagonists, so.
Yes, it was... Ugh.
Yeah.
It was, ugh. There were so many times where I was uncomfortable in a bad way. Okay, that sounds weird. You can be uncomfortable in a book and it be purposeful and it be good.
Yeah.
Just like you can be upset or sad or frustrated. And it's good because, to go back to my creative writing teacher's point, that art is a lie and the only truth is the emotional truth. And so you're trying to get emotions out of people.
True.
But there's good ways to do it and there's bad ways to do it. And it's just, ugh. The entire book felt slimy because there's all these dudes going after her and she's just rolling over and letting it happen. And I just, ugh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. There were so many things.
For sure.
I'm just reading over my notes. To completely pivot to talk about Clarissa, Mariana's friend.
Oh, yeah. I literally texted you that at some point I was convinced she was going to be the killer.
That would have been good. But no.
I had my Dwight Schrute, the person is never the one you most suspect or the least suspect, the person you most medium suspect. And I'm like, this woman is the one she always goes to. And what cemented it in my mind, where I was at in the book when I texted you that, was when she and Zoe, they were having their final breakfast or lunch or whatever it was. And they basically told her what they thought was happening and that they were going to go to this location to get the knife or whatever. And I'm like, this is it.
She knows.
This woman is the only person who knows what they both think.
That would have been good.
And I'm like, this old widowed professor or whatever is absolutely this killer.
Oh, that would have been good.
But no, that's not at all what happened.
But super petty thing, and I think it was the point, but also not the point because Mariana was into it. I feel so sorry for whoever gets the office after Clarissa retires.
Yeah.
Or dies, whichever happens first, because apparently she's never retiring. 20 plus years of smoking in that room.
Yeah.
And they do not have the budgets for or like an intense deep clean.
Nope.
That is gonna be disgusting.
Yep.
And the whole time Mariana's like, but it's so familiar to smell. It's so great. I don't get why people are complaining. I know why people are complaining. Can you imagine having asthma and being in her class and needing to go to office hours? Even if she's not actively smoking, that would be hell.
Yeah. But that is something that people who are raised around other people who smoke, and smoking is a lot more common in the UK than I think it even is here. And then smoking indoors too. But I mean, I'm not unfamiliar to that feeling because I had a lot of family who smoked growing up. And to some extent, sometimes when I smell it, it's not a good smell by any means, but it does bring you back into those memories. And Mariana obviously remembers her time at Cambridge in a very positive way, and especially with Sebastian. And she's obviously very attached to this professor. So she's going through this hyper distressing time and these small things, even if they don't make any sense to us. That I think is a little bit of the detail that the author does bring in that I think is good, because we do remember the weirdest details when we have to come back later and look into it. That's a trauma response.
And smells are very powerful.
And they are. So I totally agree with you. That office is probably nasty. But
that's all I could think of every time, because it's like, I get it, but girl.
Gross, yeah.
Please stop.
Yeah.
And she's like, I could get in trouble for this. I'm like, yeah, I think I understand why.
Oh, yeah. But, you're a tenured professor, so who's going to do anything about it?
Oh, my gosh. And so to talk about Clarissa, the entirety of part 1 is convincing Mariana to stay and actually do detective work. And I'm just meh. I also hate the reluctant detective. You're going to be the detective. Let's go. Come on.
Yeah.
Mystery. People are dying. Let's go investigate. But no, she had to be a reluctant detective. Like, I don't want to be here. She didn't even want to pull out Zoe from school or anything. It was kind of weird.
Yeah.
She was just like, nah, I just want to leave. Bye, Zoe. Good luck. I know your friend died. That sucks.
Yeah. She was just so entrenched in her own pain. And I even think something I did like at the very end was, I think it was after she had attempted to get killed or whatever. There was a very distinct line about how everything changed. All the colors got brighter. Everything seemed more vibrant. I think that was really interesting. I really did like that part. And I think it shows how that depression fog can be lifted off of people.
Yes.
Because obviously she's just so, like I said at the beginning, entrenched in her own grief and everything that she's having a hard time even being able to help Zoe through hers. And part of it too is because she doesn't understand what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. The obsession with Sebastian, like I said, it makes sense for a normal person, but in book format, it's a lot.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of times we were about to get a clue or something was about to happen or she was going to think of something and then she was like, but actually Sebastian.
Mm-hmm.
And would go through an entire chapter just thinking about Sebastian. And again, it's like, I get it. And knowing the ending, I get why he had to do that or felt like he had to do that, but I didn't care at the end.
Yeah.
I didn't get to the end to be like, oh my gosh, Persephone's so evil taking away your husband from me. I was just like, honey, go to therapy, please.
Absolutely.
I'm concerned about you.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to be here solving mysteries. You need to be seeing someone.
Yeah. And I think I remember she does have a moment where she acknowledges that she wasn't ready, because it was the moment where she goes to see Ruby. Is that what her Ruthie, the therapist who does her supervision?
Yes.
And she mentioned specifically that she hadn't seen her in a while because she knows Ruthie will want her to talk about her grief and Sebastian. And, she's not ready for that yet. So to some extent, she's aware of what she's avoiding too.
Yeah, but, and I know it's unfair because therapists are people, but at the same time, it feels a little bit irresponsible to be like, I'm not going to solve any of my issues, even though they're causing great problems with my life, but I'm going to conduct group therapy sessions with other people. It just felt a little bit irresponsible.
And it is. That's actually written in our code of ethics that we have to take care of ourselves because we do have the burden and the responsibility of other people's mental health and psychiatric well-being. And if we're not attuning to our own crap and our own issues, then we, not intentionally, but we can be hurting them as well. So it's actually an ethical responsibility that we take care of ourselves, but most of us don't really do that.
And that's why it's just like, I felt like she needed to get a new job so badly. She just needed to not be a group therapist. She needed to go do something and feel like she was doing something. And then whenever she felt emotionally ready to do it, she could rip off the Band-Aid and maybe go back to group therapy.
Yeah.
But it was just like, honey, it's been a year and I don't expect you to not think about him, like, obviously, but, and it makes sense later on where she's like, we need to have kids now, and I'm the one who recommended the trip that he ended up dying on. That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if she was just blocking that out in the beginning, but it took so long to get to that revelation, which felt pertinent, but she still felt like going over every single detail of that trip. And in the cloud coverage and the Persephone,
yeah.
The Persephone thing bothers me.
Yeah, and that really was this weird add-on, but again, like, as much as it's difficult from my perspective, we do whatever we need to do to make it make sense. And I mean, they do establish loosely that she is Greek and that she was born in Greece, right? So she's probably entrenched in that culture. She knows those stories really well. But the whole, like I said, like the trauma response thing is you focus on things that other people wouldn't, like a windstorm, right? Or the fact that you had visited this temple that day or whatever and made comments. And we're like, did I anger the gods? I mean, how many people think that a loved one dying or getting sick or cancer or whatever, we still think that today, that's punishment for something that we did.
And that could have been really interesting if the author didn't try so hard to shoehorn Persephone into the Maidens. And that didn't play out at all. I mean, technically, yes, there was something related to Persephone in there, that it was technically a cult of Persephone, but it didn't relate anything with anything. That's the kind of thing that sucks about a mystery. If you could take something completely out and the story wouldn't be affected, it's sad.
Yeah.
And Persephone is the plot line, even though that's the whole point of the Maidens and the bust on the front and a lot of what she's going after and the quotes from Greek tragedies and all of these things go back to Persephone, but in the end it wasn't important at all.
No, yeah, it was a total diversion because Sebastian and Zoe knew about her background. I want to ask you, as someone who's read more mystery novels, right, the actual setup, right, Zoe's prologue at the end where she explains how and why. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh my gosh, I hated that. Okay, I hated that so much. And the reason I hated it is it felt like a B-level slasher flick.
Yeah.
And there's always suspension of disbelief that you have to give to books because it's a work of fiction. Duh. And I don't have a lot of it. I like to think I do, but I don't have a lot of it. But I've never had such an experience where during the culprit reveal, I was so completely taken out of the book, and all I can think of is how ridiculous it is that they are running, they are sprinting, but Zoe is holding this dagger, like this giant dagger, and is giving this huge monologue while they're running through the woods.
Yeah.
Mariana's running in front of her, Zoe's in the background, and we were together, da da da. Like, it was dumb.
That's interesting though, because I didn't picture it like that. Like, if you think about like the Harry Potter films, in which one would that have been? I think Order of the Phoenix or the sixth one, where they're running just a little bit above normal human height grass or stalks in a swamp kind of thing, and then almost the audio is going on around you. Like, that's how I visualized it, and I think that's more thrilling. I guess maybe I forced myself to think about it like that, but it was one of those, they're obviously, she's trying to run away, but she can't tell where she's at, but she's hearing her talk and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it could have been more interesting if he put more action into it. Like, she hid there, and the voice came from here, and it moved, and it was behind her. And if she was using Zoe's voice to try to pinpoint where Zoe was,
yeah,
and she's running away, and she's hiding, and she falls, but she gets up, and she runs on, and all of this is happening while, that could have been more, but it's just they're running, and Zoe gives a monologue to explain what has happened.
Yeah.
Because you have been given no clues up to this point that is what is happening.
Yeah.
I hated that. That broke me. That was the other thing. There were no clues. Other than the fact that she sucks at people, and specifically men, there are no clues to the ending, and I hate that. It's cheating.
Well, what did you think of the actual process? The fact that Zoe and Sebastian were together and that they had this whole plan to get the money, because that was something you totally forgot from the beginning when Mariana talks about her dad and how her dad was this absent father because he was always working on his company or whatever, and that you forget.
Oh, I always thought it was important that Mariana had money.
I totally forgot.
But I'm also a mystery reader, and I memorize every biographical fact. about everyone.
No, I totally forgot. And then they bring it in at the end. They're like, and we did it because when someone died and you were going to get all the money, Sebastian wanted your money, but to be with me. And I'm like, what?
Yeah, I don't know. It was a hard sell at the end to be like, so I killed my best friend and these two other girls because we had planned to do this? Of all of the schemes you guys could have come up with, and this was the one you guys came up, and then Zoe being like, yeah, and I followed through with it to punish you. But how? It was very weird. And other than the fact that I thought that, yeah, Zoe needs to be committed.
Yeah, it was weird.
A lot of concern there, like a lot of issues.
Yeah.
It was weird. It was weird. It felt like he went for the most unsettling graphic for the shock value.
Yes.
It felt like shock value. It didn't feel like something that would happen. Not that mystery necessarily needs to, but there are some times where you're like, your motivation is dumb.
Yeah, well, because there's nothing leading up to it, I think, that makes you think that Mariana is actually always been the intended victim.
No.
It seems like it's something happening outside of her and she's trying to figure it out.
And if she at any point self-inserted herself and thought that, I would have thought she was being narcissistic.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of weird at the end where it was like, no, this whole thing was to set up this plot where we could kill you without any suspicion. What?
You could have come up with so many other things.
Yeah.
You could have made her death look like an accident. You didn't have to murder a bunch of people.
Absolutely.
Occam's razor a little bit, guys.
Yeah. So, I don't know.
It was weird.
Yeah.
It wasn't like the first book where I was like, oh my gosh. It was like, this is gross.
Yeah.
And we're playing with huge taboos of society. Because it's not like in the first one where it's like, oh, she broke and she killed her husband because he was cheating on her. And Theo was the one who drove her to the brink of insanity. Cheating husband gets murdered.
Yeah.
But to go to this level with no provocation really was just...
It was pretty sadistic, so...
That was gross.
Yeah.
That was another time I was like, are you okay, Alex?
What I wanted to talk about, too, was the nod to his previous book. And I think...
Theo was such a better detective in this book in one chapter.
To be fair, he is trained.
She is trained for group therapy.
No, he's trained in forensics.
I know, but she makes a big deal in the beginning of the book how Julian's not that great, even though he's trained. It's like all those forensic therapists are biased.
Fair.
I even wrote down, she claims Julian is dumb for labeling the murderer with things like superficial charm. And then when she's asked to describe the killer, she describes him as a brilliant performer. How is that different? I don't know what was with her. She just decided to hate Julian for some reason.
I would not have liked that person either, though.
But then to have Theo to come on the other side and show why psychotherapists are being called to crime scenes and not random group therapists.
Yeah.
It was dumb.
But I love that he tied in his other book. I think that was such an interesting nod to his initial writing. And I loved how it was Mariana who told him that the silent patient was at the Grove and all that kind of stuff.
Really? I don't know if I love that as much as I was like, wow, Mariana.
No.
You suck at this too.
Well, because I think it maybe gives you a little bit of, he didn't always intend to go after her.
Yeah, like he didn't seek it out, but I mean, technically he was on the hunt, but.
Yeah, he was kind of led down it a little bit. But yeah, like the fact that both of them were Rosie or Ruth, whatever, I can't remember her name.
That was the other one. I was like, Ruth, honey, you need to retire.
Yeah, I was like, dang, like this poor woman.
This is your client track record. Not your fault, but both of them, oof.
Well, I'm wondering, is this next book going to be about Ruth? That would be hilarious. No wonder she just attracts this certain type of client or whatever, because hot dang.
That's the thing, though. If he brings her in again to be the main character's therapist, I'm going to be like, she needs to retire.
Yeah, concerned.
Honestly, I did like the Theo thing. Danielle didn't like it, but she didn't like Theo. So that makes sense.
Oh, no, I mean, don't get me wrong. I liked that the author did that little nod.
Honestly, it felt more to me like, hey, remember? I wrote this book too.
Yeah.
Either that or, oh my gosh, I miss this character. put them back in.
I think it was just a nod, like, hey, let me connect these two things. And I think it's hilarious. I laughed at this when you were doing the intro. This is all about escapism.
Yes.
But this is a book very much grounded in the real world with real professions and real locations and all this kind of stuff. And so I think that's what was funny about him bringing in his other book is he's creating his own universe.
His multiverse.
This multiverse, right, of these therapists who do detective work.
And may or may not be murderers.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that was, like I said, it just made me realize the caliber difference between the books. Because even in that one chapter, Theo does way more detective work than Mariana does in this entire book.
Fair.
The only reason she figures out the ending is because Zoe wanted to stab her. The culprit revealed themselves. Mariana could have done nothing, and this would have apparently still happened.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Ugh.
I did look it up really quick just because it was right there at the end. They weren't running when she gave her monologue. They were standing there, and then all of a sudden she attacks her. So,
No, that's even worse.
a little bit.
Let me monologue to you everything instead of just stabbing you. That way the police have time to get here.
Yeah, right. And it's just one of those things. You do it as a technique and everything because the readers need that kind of closure and to put it together.
I don't know. I think that's a failure.
No, I agree.
If you get to the end of the book and you have to diatribe that long to explain what the heck happened in the book.
Yeah, because he didn't have to do that in his first one.
No.
He had put in enough detail and enough droppings that whenever it came to it and you did get to the point where you realized it wasn't told in order, you knew what happened. And there was that very brief interaction with the police officer who came to his house when you realized that now we're in the present time. But again, you didn't have any monologue about what happened or why it happened or blah, 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 because it had been told to you.
Yeah, and the only thing he did, because he monologued a little bit, but the only thing he did was catching you up to present day and being like, so Katie and I have been together for a while, and like stuff that hadn't been talked about, but it was interesting because you're like, holy crap, so this is present? What is going on?
Yeah, exactly. And something that caught me too, as we're getting close to the end of the book, was that how quickly I felt like it just stopped. That it happened, epilogue to explain what else happened. There's no other resolution, and it's not like there was more of a resolution in The Silent Patient, but this one felt like it had a very abrupt ending.
Yeah, and the way the first one ended was so symbolic.
Yes.
And I loved it with the catching the snowflakes and
Yeah.
it was good. This was not that.
Nope, it was not.
Took a little bit topics, but not at the same time. I don't know what Alex's training is or personal beliefs are, but both books claim that the killer is a victim too. They're a victim of a horrible childhood because only people with horrible childhoods could possibly be killers. No.
So that's something that particularly in my field, right? I work in a jail and I do therapists with what society deems are criminals, basically. And yes, there's an overwhelming amount of childhood trauma and people who go through things, and that is their history.
For sure.
There are definitely people who come in and they're like, nope, I had the most normal childhood. I had great parents, blah, blah, blah. And like, this is just where I am at. But I've found more and more in talking to people is this is something that us as a culture does to make ourselves feel better about these people is that, well, of course they became like this because of their history. We are able to explain it and make it make sense when we think of having a horrible traumatic history. And again, don't discount it.
Yeah, but I don't like that it's like always the has to have happened.
Yes.
Because that's disingenuous, first of all.
It is.
It's not true, second of all. And it does a disservice to people with horrible childhoods. The way that he puts it, it's like, who don't become murderers. I'm pretty sure there's way more of those.
Yeah, who live normal lives.
Ugh.
Yep.
And then the author infantiles the murderer and is always like, oh, they didn't know what they were doing. And will victim blame and be like, oh, whoever it was triggered them. And it's like, ew, to all of this?
Well, and to some extent in this book specifically, we can't not acknowledge the age difference between Zoe and Sebastian and what he did to her. And same way with Fosca, too.
Oh, no. Sebastian is absolutely the problem.
Yeah, and the same way with Fosca, too, right? To some extent, yes, yes, these girls made choices, but they did not make choices from an informed perspective, and they were manipulated into holding these beliefs.
Yeah, and by the end of the book, you learn that that's not true anyway. Zoe killed her best friend, not because the best friend triggered something in her.
Oh, yeah, no.
And so it was, that was really gross. That was so gross. There was like an entire form of thinking where Mariana was trying to figure out what the girls had in common, what specifically those did. And it was just like, ew.
But a peek behind the curtain, I mean, that's what we do. Therapy at the end of the day, all it is curiosity. It's why am I like this? Why are you like this? What happened to make me think this? And it doesn't always have to be these huge, big, traumatic, or even we call them little T traumas that happen over a lifetime. Whether or not it was someone who taught you this way of thinking, or family patterns, or intergenerational trauma, whatever it is, we're all like this for a reason. And when you start becoming curious about it, that's basically all therapy is. And so that's what she's trying to do. And that's where I think, again, you tied it back to the group therapy thing, is she's like, why this group of girls? Why the Maidens? Why call them this? Why now when Fosca's here? All this kind of stuff. Because you can have any group of girls or even guys under the influence of a narcissistic and persuasive teacher. But what happened to make these girls like this? So that is true to what she does in her profession.
Yeah, it was still gross. To kind of go back to the Mariana feels unstable, there are things like, so she goes to one of Fosca's lessons because everyone's like, he's an amazing teacher. And apparently he's an amazing teacher. He has some other character flaws, which means he should never be teaching ever again.
Yeah.
He lectures about Persephone and she's like, oh my gosh, he's doing this to torture me. And then later on, she's like looking at this portrait of Tennyson, and it's a portrait. And she gets so strangely obsessed with the look in Tennyson's eyes. And he's like, what does that look mean? And I'm just like, you know, a portrait isn't a picture, right? It could literally just be that's how the painter likes to do eyes.
Nah, but like you said, art is about the emotion, and everyone is going to look at that differently, especially because Tennyson had that important meaning to her as it pertained to her grief.
But it was the obsession. I don't know. There were so many little things where I was like, Mariana, you focus on really weird details.
Yep.
And then you do things that are weird, and then you're confused why people are mad at you for following them. The other thing she keeps doing is whenever she thinks she's being followed, she goes to a place less populated and darker.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
She's done that 3 times.
Just basic. I think maybe that proves that, again, male writing, female perspective, because all women know the protocol when you think you're being followed, and it's not that.
No.
It's not.
It's so...
Yeah.
And she goes to dinner with Fosca, and I'm just like, why?
Yeah.
And I feel like the big moment at the end was supposed to be the, oh my gosh, the diary entries are from Sebastian, not Fosca. And for momentarily, I wondered if it was Fred.
Same here.
But it wasn't as good. I feel like the journal entries themselves were way more fun in the first book.
Yeah, I agree. And there were more of them, and they played together. I totally forgot about the journal. Like, until the end, I forgot about the journal entries. And then I was like, oh, so I guess they were Sebastian and not Fosca? But it doesn't matter. Like you said, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it is. I wanted to skip them. I didn't want to skip them in the first book because it's like, oh my gosh, I'm being stalked. And oh my gosh, these things are happening to me. And they're interesting stuff. But his are just like, I'm a murderer. Rawr.
Yeah.
I had a bad childhood. Rawr. It was nothing that really played into anything.
Exactly.
He also tends to info dump way more in this book. And it reads like someone who wants you to know how much research they've done on a topic and not necessarily like the topic was important for the book.
Yeah, I agree.
This book would have been so much better from Zoe's perspective. And I know that she did it, and so there would have been a lot of workarounds you had to do, but Zoe being there and it being her best friend that died, and then she was part of the cult and having a first-person perspective instead of having everything third perspective.
Yeah.
I feel like would have been so much more interesting.
Even just perspective swapping, right? Because you absolutely could have written this book from Fosca's perspective.
Ooh.
And played us to think that the thing that he was hiding was that he was murdering them, but the thing he was actually hiding was just that he was sleeping with them.
Yeah.
And so switching back and forth between even Mariana and Fosca's position to use it as a, yeah, like, look how sketchy and creepy this dude is. And then you read his perspective perspective, like, look what he's doing, you know, because that's what he did with The Silent Patient. But no, it was all Mariana with the exception of the journal chapters.
Yeah.
And
I feel like The Silent Patient did a really good job of funneling your captivity, whereas Maidens just frustrated it.
Yes, I agree.
And also, she felt uncomfortable by their company, but nevertheless, she persisted. Should be the tagline of this book.
Yeah.
General thoughts. Like I said, I really feel like this book could have gone with a couple more rounds of editing.
Yeah.
And been so much better. But it felt like maybe it was rushed because they really wanted to capitalize on his first book.
I agree.
If you wait too long, your popularity is not going to be there.
Yeah, but in reality, your fans are loyal and honorable because he did do a tremendous job with the first one. The first one was genuinely very good.
Yeah, and it just feels like the sophomore slump, and sophomore slumps happen in music all the time because you have years and years to work on these songs and perfect them while you're traveling and playing, and then once you're signed, they're like, okay, great, now write a second one.
Yeah.
And that kind of feels like what happened here, and that makes me a little sad.
Yeah, so I don't know if he's going to do another one. I didn't realize that this was published back in 2021 until you mentioned it at the beginning. So, I mean, it's been quite a bit of time. But at the end of the day, he got the sales because he got the sales based on his popularity of the first one.
Yeah, but there's a concept that I've been really interested in. It's the delayed flop. And I'm worried his third is going to flop because the second one wasn't as good as the first. And so many people bought the second based on the first, and they're going to feel burned.
True.
And now they're going to be sketchy.
Yeah, that's entirely possible. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't read another book that he wrote. I might.
I would, but I would not pre-order like I did this book. I would read the reviews. And I think that's going to hurt him in the end because hopefully it's a great book, but it's not going to be like the instant New York Times bestseller because you had all these pre-orders necessarily. I mean, it could still be, but this became an instant New York Times bestseller, not because a bunch of people read it and thought it was good, but because a lot of people pre-ordered it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the hilarious thing is, at your recommendation, I read the first one and then I recommended it to my therapist actually, and she read it and she's like, I've actually had this book for years because it's something from our perspective. You see the cover, you get the background, you're like, yeah, a therapist should read this book. But she's like, I've never actually read it. And so she read it and then talked to me about it. And so I was halfway through this one. I was like, well, this is interesting. So I was like, hey, there's a second one. And I almost feel the need to just tell her like, no, don't bother because it's just not as good.
It's not the same. And when you have such tight timelines to read stuff.
Yes.
And you have limited free time. That's why I'm like, a little bit burned. One question for the author. I want to know why a group therapist. Only because he didn't really use it. And that makes me sad.
Yeah, I think he tried. He had the basic understanding of what a group therapist was and what group therapy is. And he basically, for the sole purpose of it was the group of maidens. And that's the only reason.
Yeah. But it, like I said, she doesn't really interact with them as a group that much. And she does that one thing of group therapy, but Fosca turns it around on her. And then she learns Zoe's been lying to her.
Yep.
And it's kind of it.
Why are the husbands always cheating on the wives? Why are the husbands such weird people? Because we both have very wonderful husbands.
Why are the men such weird people?
Yes. So that would probably be my question for the author is why do you keep writing men that cheat on their wives and also who are like borderline psychopaths?
Stalkers for sure.
Yeah, Sebastian more than the other one. The other one just felt like he was just being a douchebag and just cheated on his wife. But both of them, that's what drove their motivation. And that's basically what was the secret behind the book. It was just the husband who cheated on his wife.
I think the 3 marriages he's written, all 3 of them had a cheating spouse.
What third one are you talking about?
Theo and Katie.
Oh, yeah. I guess that's fair. With Theo and Katie, it was the wife who was cheating.
No happy marriages here.
No happy couples, yeah, at all. And I even think Clarissa, didn't her husband die, I think?
Yeah, I think her husband died.
Yeah, she was like a widower. So I was just like, man, you or your readers need some understanding of what healthy love looks like.
Healthy boundaries.
Yes. Give us some boundaries, please.
No, then there wouldn't be a story. Detectives don't. But like I said, the first one was fine because he was doing it for the mystery. But the second one was like, this is not helping the mystery. This is just making me uncomfortable.
Yeah, exactly.
Rating, I would give this listening to over-the-top conspiracy theories against your will out of 10.
That's fair. Yeah, definitely like a 3 out of 10 for me. I definitely have some insight. I think that as a therapist that I can appreciate and all of that, but at the end of the day, it was a little bit nonsense.
Yes, a little bit nonsense is a good way to put it.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not a big fan of nonsense. So.
Yeah. Would you read it again?
No.
No.
I'd read the first one again, not this one though.
I've already given away the copy.
Yeah. I bought it on Kindle, so I can't really do that. I told my husband that he should read the first one, and this second one, I'm like, I'm just going to tell you what happened because you're not going to read this.
Yeah, and that was the thing, because it's like my sister-in-law recommended The Silent Patient, so that's why we did The Silent Patient. And then I found out about Maidens before her, and she's like, oh, that's cool. And she put it on her reading list. But I was like, not even halfway through the book, I was like, take it off.
Yeah.
Don't. If you like the first one,
Yeah, don't do it. I don't necessarily think it was a very good escapism book.
No, which is weird, because that's what he was trying to do.
Yeah, no, definitely no escapism in it.
The ending was very, let's bring the worst parts of the world to the forefront right now.
Exactly. All those character flaws. But I mean, at the end of the day, different critics might look at that as he was able to capture, we said, the whole biases of how people think and being really engrossed in your own opinions and all that kind of stuff and think that it's good. So I don't know. But I don't think it was told well.
Based on the ratings that I've seen, I don't know if critics are saying that.
Yeah.
Like I said, I just wish he had done more editing.
Yeah, I really do think if he had gone through a couple more rounds of editing, it would have been much better.
Alas.
Live and let learn.
So, have you read this book? If you could revisit anywhere from your past, where would you go? Do you have any book recommendations for us? Tell us all about it in the comments below. If you like the video, hit like, and if you're enjoying yourself, hit subscribe for more. Thank you for exploring the Maidens with us. I'm Sam Reiner.
And I'm Caitlin.
And we hope to see you and a friend here next time. Escape With Me Book Club is a Lunar Skulk production. Check us out on TikTok or Instagram to keep up to date with us. Lunar_SKULK.